like 500 leaders and they all raise their hand, but there's no definition, there's no conversation on what that looks like.
People who go to too much grad school do a lot of research. Sometimes they come up with brilliant ideas that people on the ground have already figured out.
I'm wondering if there's some exercise or frameworks we can peel the onion around that you guys feel work across both to connect some dots.
Right.
Here's one that I do think applies.
Paul Leon here. Thank you so much for being a consumer of the show. And I want to take our relationship a step further. When you join our newsletter at themanagersmic.com website, I'm going to give you a free resource called A Selling Script to Skyrocket Sales. Thank you so much for being a listener and watcher of the show. And now back to the episode.
Have with us today Brian Powell and Tom Reynolds. Brian Powell, you are a leadership coach who helps organizations turn potential into sustain high performance, whose work focuses on building trust, clarity, and shared ownership within teams to drive measurable results in complex, high-pressure environments. You hold a master's degree in organizational leadership from Colorado State University and are completing a PhD in performance psychology at Grand Canyon University, where you research centers on team effectiveness. You're a professional certified coach for International Coaching Federation and has logged more than 5,000 coaching hours with executives and leadership teams across Fortune 100 organizations, Wells Fargo, Merrill Lynch, and Crown Castle. You integrate leadership psychology, behavioral assessment, and stakeholder-based coaching to deliver measurable business impact, and you are a contributor to the Forbes Coaches Council to serve in leadership roles that advance the coaching profession. Tom Reynolds, you are a business psychologist, executive coach, and trusted advisor to senior leaders across industries, including biotech manufacturing, financial services, and professional services, who partners with executives and teams to help them get unstuck, rethink challenges, and make meaningful progress in complex environments. You are both authors of the book, The Efficient Frontier of Teaming, expertise in psychological safety, adaptive leadership, and agile goal setting, whose work helps teams harness productive conflict, strengthen trust, and sustain performance. And just if I didn't flex enough for you here, Tom, you hold a doctorate in psychology and an MBA from Widener University, one of the only integrated business and psychology programs in the United States. Tom, your research helps people practice design leadership solutions that are both evidence-based and actionable. And I got to say, Brian and Tom, welcome to the Manager's Mic. There is a ton of intelligence in this virtual room together. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, appreciate being here, Paul. I mean, basically, you had to open up and say you got a couple of coaching geeks on the call today. We love working with teams and just helping them, once again, reach their full potential, whatever that looks like for them.
What I do, for those who may have been joining us for the first time, to make sure our guests are empowered, I send just a simple email to say what questions might a guest like to be questioned. So I have a question, and this is just to kind of start us off going, Brian and Tom. So here's the first question. So team building has been discussed for decades, yet many organizations still struggle with alignment, trust, and communication. Brian or Tom, I'll let you guys decide who wants to go first. What do you believe most companies are still getting wrong about how teams actually develop and perform?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. I'll just start us off, and then we'll get Tom's fantastic knowledge on the subject as well. But when we start working within these organizations, working with these teams, think about when you onboard with a company. They get your laptop to you, they start showing you how to log in, they show you all the tasks, responsibilities, everything that you're going to be executing upon for the team itself in your role. The one thing they don't talk about is talk about like how can we create a trusting environment? Like let's define psychological safety together. what does an actual high performing team look like? Let's find out more about you and your uniqueness and what strengths that you bring to the team, the ideas and how we communicate together. So the best way that I sum it up when working with a team is they're really good usually at the quantitative. We'll look at the revenue, we'll look at the production, we'll look at, our productivity. But what is really lacking is really thinking about those qualitative competencies, those ones that I mentioned. Like, we don't have these open discussions. I stood in front of audiences and said, how many of you are on a high performing team? And 500 leaders, and they all raised their hand. But there's no definition, there's no conversation on what that looks like. And like I said, a lot of the qualitative things that maybe either get taken for granted or we sort of push to the side because maybe that's more of the fluff stuff, depending on the leader.
Yep. And I'll add to that, as you said, Paul, the industry has been kind of charging ahead for the past few decades. Everybody gets that team development is important. It needs to feel good to be part of a team, but people don't know how to make that happen beyond surface level, right? So this is why Brian and I focus so much on authenticity and engagement. People aren't being authentic if they show up to the team saying, hey, I've got to get along and agree with everybody and make everything rosy and cheerful. What we focus on is how do we get the real stuff out there? You have to do it skillfully. You have to sign up. You have to, sometimes we contract directly with teams about, hey, here's how we're going to engage in disagreement. But really, at least from my perspective, and I think Brian humors me on this, maybe he believes this even more than me, you got to go through some reps of some tough conversations and commit to coming out the other side. And then, you know what? You trust each other. Even if you don't agree 100%, you've gone through some difficult things together. Even if it was just a difficult conversation, you say, I know how that person acts when it gets dicey, and now I want to work with them no matter what the situation.
Right. Anything you want to add there, Brian?
No, I was gonna say, I think I'm spot on, right? We're talking about those qualitative competencies. One, maybe they grew up with a leader who was more command and control, like what we've seen in the past, right? So they try to mimic that style or that approach, thinking that's what a successful leader looks like. And when you think about the team, I think Tom was spot on there. When you really start to engage in these conversations, like, we want to be able to challenge each other. We want to be able to think about the conflict in a productive way. Lencioni talks about productive conflict. And when I'm engaging with teams, they don't have those reps that Tom's talking about. Rather, it's usually like there's an avoidance. So maybe we're not hitting certain KPIs, so we're just not going to talk about it, right? Or if we do talk about it, it's I'm hitting my goals, you're not hitting your goals. What's wrong with you? Rather than, like, when we think about accountability, we have a concept in our book called positive accountability, where we're there to support each other. We're there knowing that failure is going to happen. How do we come out the other side and learn from it? And a lot of these teams that we've been engaged with, it's not intentional, but it just hasn't been in their roadmap of skills to acquire and to actually sit down and talk about with their teams actively. And so it gets missed, or once again, it gets discounted when we'll talk about it, where that's the fuel that actually drives the results. And when we start thinking about it, there's nothing broken, but oh my gosh, what would that full potential of the team look like? And that usually gets leaders and teams really curious to think about, hey, what that next step is. And like I said, a good part of the time, it's in those qualitative competencies.
Is there a framework or a type of exercise that you guys seen that is effective across all industry levels? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this. The reason I ask is I imagine, based on the type of company, psychological safety will swing different ways. And I'll give you an example. I imagine, like, when I used to work in car rental, psychological safety wasn't as prioritized. I'm not knocking the car rental industry. I just want to be very clear. This is just an example. But because somebody would, if they didn't get their car, they became hostile, or they didn't get the car they originally booked. Versus when I started working with business owners who are making $5 million a year, and it's like banking and stuff, psychological safety would be seen more top of mind than the car industry. And I don't know if it's because of an income level reason or if it's because of an industry reason. So I'm wondering if there's some exercise or frameworks we can kind of peel the onion around that you guys feel work across both to connect some dots.
Go for it.
Even within your car rental company, I'm sure there are teams, I'm sure there are stores, branches where there is psychological safety and where there isn't. Okay. And why is that? I mean, sometimes Brian could tell you stories about this all day long. people who go to too much grad school, do a lot of research. Sometimes they come up with brilliant ideas that people on the ground have already figured out. Okay.
Right.
Here's one that I do think applies everywhere you go. We're borrowing it from a psychologist named Tim Clark, who talks about psychological safety as elevating intellectual friction while maintaining low social friction. It's almost like a thing. And usually those things move together. So if we're in a disagreement about how we're going to handle this situation with a dissatisfied customer, usually they get stuck together. And if Paul's got an idea that I think is silly, I act not just like the idea is silly, but like I don't like to work with Paul. And Paul's back on his heels. Now he's going to do some performance art to try to make his boss or his teammate happy. It's not really going to solve the problem. It's just going to get through the moment. You're not going to build any deeper collaboration skills. You're not going to figure out how to solve that problem better in the future. You're just going to get through the moment, white knuckling it, gritting your teeth, things like that.
Right.
Hey, if you can disagree with the idea, but take care of Paul, the person. Hey, Paul, tell you what, I don't know what to do with this irate customer. Figure it out. Tell me how it worked. We'll debrief afterwards. We'll figure out what works well in the future. Even if I think your idea is totally silly, if I do that and I give you the chance to be yourself, try your thing out, and we both have a real conversation about whether it worked, that's much better in terms of the outcome. And that you can trust this guy, Tom, even if he thinks you're an idiot in that moment. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that language is too casual, but I think that's what it really feels like. To your point about why is it over in this banking industry and not in, car rentals? I don't know if there's anything to it. Sometimes, there's differential investment in terms of like who gets what and why. And so sometimes some of these best ideas sort of hit the top of the house and then gradually make their way down. And we want to open up our ideas to leaders at every level, teams at every level, whether it's, a performance team in a branch location of a car rental business or in a C-suite. Some of these ideas are really universal, and that's what makes it so easy to kind of, transfer our framework around the different groups that we serve.
Right.
One of the things I would add to that is we did develop a tool. So through all our coaching engagements, working with teams. So Paul, to your question, it had to become real. It had to become tangible rather than just some sort of theory or concept up there. And when we think about things like psychological safety or trust or how we're going to hit our measurable results, all those things we help the team define. So we have a tool that we call the team contract that's in the team. Once again, we've used in thousands of team engagements where we can actually sit down with all team members, not just the leader, and have them sit at the table together and start to define how they're going to operate together, how they're going to create psychological safety, how they're going to build trust, how they're going to engage in productive conflict. So that now it becomes real, it becomes tangible, and now we've defined our culture that we want to operate in rather than it just being, kind of like, we'll just kind of grasp to whatever the leader sort of knows in his kind of book of skills. We want the whole team to be engaged in that conversation. And when we see the whole team engaged in those discussions, it just brings the team to a whole different level because it's not level. It's not us coaching the leader and the leader trying to go back and talk about this with the team. When the team sits at the table and creates these things together, all of a sudden, that's where the words ownership, empowerment, accountability take meaning. Because you let me sit at the table and I created 5% of it. I now own it because you allowed me to be that creative individual. You allowed me to have ownership of it. You empowered me rather than dictating what that's supposed to look like.
And what was that tool called again? Just so I can make sure.
The team contract. And we'll send you a copy of that, kind of a link, and give it to all your readers. They can have it, utilize it within their teams as well.
I'm going to talk about something that I almost feel you can't get away from the topic, but I'm going to do it anyways. So here's the question. As workplace becomes more fast-paced, AI-driven, and increasingly hybrid, what competencies do you believe will become essential for teams to thrive over the next 5 to 10 years?
What a great question. I think it's something that we're working actively with teams right now. Internally, I create a program called Amplifying Human Intelligence. And the reason I talk about it that way is that there is this, every conference I go to, AI is every single presentation. And I'm tired of talking about AI. I think most people are exhausted by it, right? Rather than like, how are we going to utilize it? Show me how to take action with it. Something that helps me as a thought partner, collaborator, something to challenge my bias. So that's what we're really working with teams to say, like, are you using it more transactionally, where I throw in a prompt or two, or I'm using it as a note taker? Great stuff, but that's not leading to results with the team. How do you use it as that partner? You can help it use it as a coach. You can actually have to play that role, right? And really think up, like, hey, here's where I'm struggling. Here's where I'm seeing anxiety. Help me through this. So it can be something that really helps you when you start to think about the way you develop, the way you adapt, all the things come along. And so as we approach this new age, if you will, I'll even go back 5 years ago when COVID hit. The workplace has already changed. We went into this hybrid remote work, and now we're still operating by the old playbook. You see all these companies that went to more of like the remote to the hybrid. Now they're calling everybody back this last year or so, even though all the numbers show they're more productive working hybrid or working from home. So they're using the old playbook that we've got to be together. We've got to be able to sit in a room together by the water cooler to be able to collaborate and innovate. Not true. So when you're asking those skills, I think it's those skills that have been talked about for a while. Now they're going to be highlighted even more. So things like effective communication skills. How do I make sure I can build emotional equity or emotional connection with my audience, whether it's a team member, a client, a prospect, all those things come along with it. So when we start to think about emotional intelligence, I think all the research shows that that's been one of the most popular skill sets for the last decade that employers are looking for. It's just going to heighten the ability going forward. So AI can be used, once again, in an effective way, not as the end all be all. And so how do we get people to understand that? And then once again, how do we have it so that they can spend more time with their team members, spend more time with their clients, rather than get bogged down by some of the things that cause friction in the business that we can operationalize? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, no, I would build on that and say, I think being able to reflect on your work, this is going to sound funny, but almost in sort of like a practical sense in terms of, like, if I'm doing an executive assessment, I do a fair amount of assessment work. There's a process there that I wouldn't realize. I'm doing multiple things at once. I'm talking to the leader I'm assessing. I'm taking notes, either longhand or typing. Then I'm looking for evidence. I got to rate this leader's ability to influence without authority. I got to look for all the stuff. There are many ways I can free myself up if I use AI to, for instance, transcribe the conversation. So I don't have to worry about typing and catching everything he said. The AI is doing it, and I can just focus more on the person. If the AI can search for my evidence, I can rule out, hey, it hallucinated this didn't happen, blah, 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 but it said this. And suddenly I'm spending about the same amount of time on the assessment, but more of that time is sort of high quality thought and less sort of cognitive grunt work. And then I've just got better ideas. I've got, ideas are coming out of my mouth more clearly, more cleanly, more to the point. And I can give people more of my time and my mind share and solve better problems than I was when I was just kind of stuck grinding away on my own, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And it's an interesting topic because you both are highly educated. Like, Tom, you have a doctorate in psychology and MBA. Like, I just got my MBAs. When you were going through your doctor, maybe your MBA in the education world, and I don't know when you got it. It makes me a bad host. I apologize.
That's okay. 2014.
2014. So if you could go back in time, because I feel because you didn't have AI, in my opinion, I feel like your skill sets, Brian, are highly coveted. And I'm going to tell you why. The cost to run some of these data centers, I think I last checked, was about $634 billion. And they have to, is it more than that?
No, you're spot on.
And it costs to redo the work of like those cooling centers. Like we have one, like Google building, one underground, not far from me. It's another, every 5 years, they have to reinvest that, is what I read. I feel that because of the demand on it, I feel if that bubble does pop, people like yourself, Tom, and Brian are going to be highly coveted. Here's my question. If you could go back to Tom in 2014, would you use AI more? Because I know in education right now, it's kind of like hush, hush, don't talk about it. Or would you still kind of be against it because you value just the power of the human brain? I don't know if that question made sense. I'm just curious, since you're both well educated.
Yeah. Brian, I have a couple thoughts, but you can go first if you want.
So we're at different ends of the spectrum there, right, buddy? So, I mean, I'm currently in my PhD work. I don't know how somebody did their doctorate without using AI. And I don't say that to like write my dissertation or anything of that nature. What I mean is I don't have to go to the library and spend 14 hours trying to nail down scholarly published articles, right? I can go to AI and say, I'm looking for 5 articles on high performing teams in certain industries. Provide me a summary, provide me a link. I can look at all those 5 and say, these 2 I need to read. These other 3 would be a waste of my time. That's where AI can help me, right? Once again, as a thought partner and a collaborator. So as I think about this next stage and where I am, I'll say about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was completely against AI. Being a coach and an author, I think I've had this conversation with Tom, like it's going to kill everybody's creativity. Everybody's going to sound exactly the same. It's all going to come out and it's going to be like the AI garbage that everybody keeps talking about, throwing around the internet. I was wrong because once again, the way you approach AI, if you can approach it a thought partner, it can challenge some of the things that you're coming up with, or some of the concepts that you want to develop. It can really think through like your style and your approach and how it's different from maybe other thought leaders in the past. So, as you approach it with your thought process, with your ideas, your creativity, that's where it can be really expansive in terms of helping you develop what you're trying to put out into the world, not just hey, write me an article on such and such, and then once again comes out to be me, right? It comes out to become the average, what we've all seen. Tom, you can go
Yeah.
from the other end of the spectrum. You're already
Well, no, everything you said is something I agree with. I mean, here's what I would say going back in time is how do we teach people to know what AI is good for and what it's not, right? So if you ask it to write your paper, it's going to write something that reads reasonably well and is probably largely accurate. But guess what? There might be embarrassing mistakes in it that are going to get you caught. And
Yeah.
2, you didn't learn anything through that process, okay? Because you just said write it from scratch. It can kind of do that. It can get it right a lot of the time, not all the time. But you're there not to produce a bunch of good papers. You're there to leave as a person who's more expert in the topic that you went to study. So you haven't achieved your goal if you're using AI that way. But if you understand, like, hey, this is a tool that can help expand my thinking, it can help me find things faster. I'm looking for a note I have to myself on my desk right now. I mean, I'm in the middle of more than one consulting engagement at the moment.
Right.
Doing some work through the weekend, getting tired, and I use an app called Perplexity, which people might know about. It's good for academics because it's very dialed into what academic research is available in different areas. And I just asked it about work rest ratios for white collar work, right? So like you go to the gym, you might have a trainer who talks to you about like a 2-to-1 work rest ratio, work for 30 seconds, rest for 15. And I came up with some benchmarks, which, what's interesting is there's 3 or 4, like one was like work for 52 minutes, take a break for 17. And another one was like work for 120 minutes, take a rest for 25. Or if I found the note, I'd give you the real numbers. But then that gives me a little framework that's evidence-based that I didn't have 10 minutes ago that I can use to sort of like almost plan my weekend where I'm trying to like get work done, go to my daughter's softball game, relax a little bit myself, blah, blah, blah. And, 15 years ago, it would have been a lot more cumbersome to get there. You get there slowly through Google, but if you know what you're doing with the tool, you can get it in an instant and start changing what you're doing.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about agents yet, right? So I'm working with a lot of teams, and Paul, I know you work with a lot with sales. So I'll work with like these large wealth management firms all across the nation. And we've created like prospecting agents. So I can put in any name, any position, any title, workplace, and it can bring me up. I've trained it to build up a 21-point dossier on individuals, right? So it's a little scary what you can find, but if you think about that, like now, if I'm trying to prospect somebody, I think I could really impact from that wealth advisory space. I can now look at things that I can emotionally connect with them because I can build things in there like, I built in disc preference. So it can infer based on all the information that's pulling articles and videos and everything that that individual's put on LinkedIn is pulling from everywhere. So now it can help me to think about like, well, how do I have this discovery conversation? So then once again, it'll challenge the way that I show up to really think about their emotional need, not my own. AI is not going to run the meeting, but it's helping me prepare differently as a thought partner. So those are the ways that we think it's going to change the workplace. And like I said, I'm excited because I think it's going to give time back to a lot of individuals to spend more time with people. But when you're asking that question about the skills, emotional intelligence is going to continue to rise. Thinking about effective communication skills is going to become the norm rather than something that the team members just do at an offsite. And then really thinking about the diversity of thought and experience where you can have that productive conflict, innovate and collaborate at the highest level. I think those are going to be the ones that really rise to the top.
I agree. Tom, did you have anything before I respond? I just want to make sure your voice.
One more thing, right? Here's another thing to, in addition to communication skills, EQ, the only thing I'd add, and I think Brian's getting at this as well, is it adds that much more importance to human judgment. So it's like if the AI can do anything that, I don't know, a spreadsheet or Google search or any of the other sort of, rote or quantitative tools would have done in the past. So if that's all done and everybody's got access to that, then your ability to figure out, okay, then what do I do with that next? That becomes premium. That could mean lots of different things in lots of different industries, but I think that's going to be a really critical way of thinking about the future too.
Yeah, spot on.
I agree with you guys 100%. I need to check out Perplexity. The tool I use mostly has been ChatGPT because it streamlines a lot of my SEO and thumbnail work in combination with Canva. Just being transparent with the tools I use, like outside of my day job.
It's going to be your creativity, your critical thinking skills that you bring to AI, right? So I was talking about the prospecting agent. Not everybody's going to be thinking of how to pull that together, what that would look like, all the information, where to pull it. I said I'm a little hesitant to unleash that one to the rest of the world yet. I did it with a big team up in Chicago. I did it with an individual who was in the room, and it pulled off what he has watched on Netflix last, his books, because he's putting things on Bing and some other sources. So it can get really in depth. I don't know if you'd show up to a prospecting meeting and say, hey, so you just watched the F1 documentary on Netflix as well, right? It's a little scary, but once again, it's going to be your critical thinking skills, your creativity that you bring to AI, which is going to separate you from those other teams as well.
I mean, a quick tie back to psychological safety. Here's where the human judgment piece comes in. Like Brian said, hey, he really shouldn't know that this guy's been watching an F1 documentary, even though that's a pretty innocent detail to have. There are other less innocent details out there. And the way that we use these tools, I mean, it's, if you read the newspaper, this will come up in like a macro sense, but just like person to person, if you have access to information you wouldn't have in the past, like be a good colleague, citizen, teammate, whatever you want to call it, and respect the common sense you have about what I should know and what I shouldn't know, and what that's going to do to my working relationship with this person if I just get way too into it with them or use data I have on them the wrong way or don't tell them something they would really want to know that might be available out.
I think that's the human side of it. When Tom and I wrote this book, we were looking at different factors, different research, and we have what we call the efficient frontier of teaming. So we've got 4 different types of teams that a team can work through. So it's a system that you're creating, right? And when we started to look at all the research, it was telling a story that was just not very good, if you will, globally. So if you look at like Gallup numbers, for instance, right? I think the last 12 years, engagement scores continually go down. We're at like 30% engaged of team members globally in their current work, which is costing something. And Tom, keep me honest here. I think it's like $8.8 trillion because people are not fully engaged in what they do. So when you think about the engagement side of it, the story's out there. It's just we're not paying attention to it. So how can we help people feel engaged in their role and not just feel they're showing up to do some transactional job, right? Just the tasks and the responsibilities, that they're actually contributing to the success of the organization. And then the authenticity side of it, that's something that we're very passionate about. Tom's certified in different personality assessments. I am as well. One that I use here with teams is DISC, where not only do we do it in individual assessments, but we map out the whole team. And what I find so interesting is you can have things where the similarity effect shows up, where we usually connect with those that are just like us. So I'll see a team that has like 25 team members and they're all exactly the same or pretty similar when it comes to their attributes. Or I'll see a team where the senior leader unknowingly was just hiring everybody opposite of them, thinking that all of a sudden I had to fill in this skill set, but then 15 team members all are identical and the same. So when you ask that question, we think about like innovation, we think about collaboration, we think about like full potential of our results. If we can have people, one, show up fully engaged in their role, in their job, and they feel that they're actually empowered, they have ownership, that they're actually contributing to the success of the organization, tone goes up, their effort goes up, the support goes up. When you think about it from an authenticity side, that's a big driver. So when people feel like they have to wear their mask, I have to show up like my leader wants me to show up. That's really showing that, hey, I'm not fully bringing myself to my full ideas, the things that could be unique, things that could be contrary to what the leader's coming up with that really could take this project or this result we're trying to work on to a whole other level. So when we start looking at it, we go from those two levers and we think about at the bottom, we have what's called a dependent team. You're dependent on the leader. You're not going to make a decision because you're afraid to make that decision. So you have to have the leader and they become the bottleneck. It's almost equivalent to like the old command and control style. Think about it. Then you evolve through these four and we call it the top. It's an empowered team. You respect my ideas. You want to hear those ideas. We're bringing unique strengths to the team. We're going to think about things differently so that we can come up with the best result. And if we have everybody on the same that is, not authentic to how they show up, we're not getting that diverse of thought and experience. So that's why we pull on those two levers. And like I said, research really opened our eyes when we were curious about pulling this together and thinking of what really drives that performance. And those were the two that really stood out to us as we started to craft that whole framework. Tom, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would add is I think there's been a shift that Brian and I observed in this research and have just seen through our own, decade plus experience coaching, working in other jobs and things like that. There was a time maybe where you go to a job and you put on the jersey for the company you work for, and it's just understood that's what we're going to do. Okay. People are not willing to put that jersey on in the same unthinking way anymore. They want to be respected for who they are. They want to be able to put that jersey on and be whoever they are in a sense, outside of work, what they have going on at home, what their ideas are about the industry they work in, whatever it may be. People want a different contract with their employer in terms of all those intangible things that aren't written down, but we all kind of understand what we're doing here. And so if you're going to get people to put on the jersey for your organization, you have to figure out how to make that authentic for the person joining your team. And it doesn't mean it can't be one size fits all. It also can't be all of us running around making the leader herd cats and doing our own thing, but you have to engage people in a way that's authentic if you really want to get the most value out of people. And frankly, what are we here to do, to begin with? Like, why are we showing up at work every day? Is it to tick a box? Is it to earn a paycheck? Is it to, get through the next mortgage payment, or is it to make a difference somehow, do some work that's really valuable beyond the X's and O's, beyond the dollars and cents? And teams that really excel today have figured out how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's why Tom and I both have different approaches, and that's why we collaborated on writing this book that took us a couple of years to actually get out there and get published. So we already talked about Gallup. There's a ton of information that you can go out from Gallup, and it's all free. It's out there for leader and teams to examine. Want to bring up, there was a study Dale Carnegie and Associates put out because there's no definition for a high-performing team. So I'll give you a story. I was standing in front of 300 leaders at a very large wealth advisory firm. All these are market executives at billions of dollars that they're responsible for. And I asked the question, how many are on a high-performing team? So out of the 300, all 300 raised their hand, whether it's out of peer pressure or not knowing the definition or feeling that they have to raise their hand because they are high-performing. And then I asked them, and I said, that's not even statistically possible. Because when you go to that research, it looks at it, and only 30% on a global level are considered high-performing teams. And the three top competencies, number one is having those well-defined KPIs and goals, which I have found that maybe at a high level, there's lagging KPIs, but leading KPIs, set expectations are really sometimes non-existent. Number two is communication. like we talked about earlier. So effective communication shows up as the number 2 competency of a driver, a high performing team. The third one, which shocks a lot, is consistent time for learning and development. And I can tell you in our coaching, that times gets pushed to the side. Like we're not talking about like our mandatory classes that we have to take every year right through our organization. We're saying like, hey, are we giving our team members every month time to develop their skills, develop competencies they want to really enhance going forward? And usually that gets pushed aside for the transactional work of their day to day, rather than saying like, well, summer's coming and we'll have time to, to kind of sit down and go through and do some learning together. So when they hear that, then I go back to all those 300 in that example and say, how many now are on a high performing team? And it's like 15 people that raise their hand, which is fine. We've got some high performers out there. But once again, when you look at the research, one, we don't define in the workplace what a high performing team actually is or what they do. Two, really thinking about it from an aspect of, are we really in a high performance level, or am I just under peer pressure or thinking I have to say that, or from ego? I think that I'm a high performing team. And three, do I know what actually aligns with that? And are we focused on those areas? So, once again, we've put a lot of thought, a lot of effort, a lot of research into the book. So as Tom was mentioning, those are all great influences. Simon Sinek is somebody who I geek out about. So we've got some of that influence in there as well. But I think when you think about a high performing team, actually define it together, look at research and say, put our time and attention so we can actually raise our hand confidently, not just out of peer pressure. I worked on a large telecommunications company. I was working with as an executive coach. So all of our different leaders, all different levels. I think I had like 190 leaders that I was working with personally, sales, service, construction, marketing, all over, right? So really helping them to become the best versions of themselves. And Tom was part of that organization in a learning development capacity, helping us to build all these programs, everything that would help the overall organization to really up their level and skill set. And we got put on a project together early on, like a couple months that I was within the organization, got to spend some time together. And what I always love, what I always appreciate, especially in the coaching and consulting world, is somebody that comes with a different perspective. I think in this profession, people can challenge me on it, but I believe it's an art form. So what I mean by that is like I can walk into a museum, I can see a Picasso, I can see a Michelangelo, I can see others, and I can appreciate all of them. And it's the same way. Like I have a different approach that I approach when I'm thinking about leaders and teams. Tom has a different approach, and we put those together. We felt it created something that would really be beneficial to teams out there. Practical frameworks, ways to really bring to their attention, get them curious. And then, like I said, with our different skill sets applied, it really became something that could be valuable and impactful.
I mean, here's the only thing I would add is there are different roads into the coaching space. Okay. So I went to shrink school, right, to become a therapist. Okay. And then I went into my career. Brian had a career leading people, solving organizational problems, things like that, and said, hey, I'm going to give coaching a try. And at this place where we both worked, it was like, two ships sort of crossing in the night, but noticing there's some talent over there that I don't have for reasons that I can't control. But it's like, if you come out of a clinical psychology program, you're going to want to nest everything you do in that, and you're not going to pay as much attention to more industry originated coaching approaches. And I just would sit in rooms and be like, everything Brian says just makes a ton of sense. Like whatever I was thinking of doing, I wasn't thinking of what he was doing. He was just so to the point. And I was like, okay, like I need to go learn more of what he's doing. Like at one point I said, Brian, what are your 5 best books on coaching? Nothing that I was assigned in grad school. So it's just exposed to a lot more. I mean, if you get us at a bar and we both had a beer or two, Brian will describe me as more analytical and things like that. And he's just like intuitive and connects the dots quickly and connects with the person quickly. I can do that too, but Brian just has a knack for that. And so it's just recognizing there was something complementary that we could get out of working together.
Can I go back for a second? And I think, I don't know if you just quoted Kenny Rogers or Dolly Parton, but you said 2 ships passing in the night. Isn't that like song?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like,
apologies if that was the wrong metaphor or one you weren't comfortable with.
No, I loved it, man. It had me
That's where
like
human judgment
right?
is still important if you're gonna use a metaphor, deliver a cheesy joke.
Now I got to go to Spotify and look that up. I got that, Eric. It's got to be a song.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tom and I both have been actively working in the coaching space for 14, 15 years, over a decade, let's call it that. And so, these are things that we've done with leaders and with team and coming up back from different concepts, different approaches. So we have a lot of uniqueness that we put into this book, right? And there's some that we talked about from that research perspective of those thought leaders that we really think fantastic. So when I think about it, it's like probably that whole 13, 14 years of growth for myself of thinking like, how would this interact with a team? How would we start to develop this? And different iterations that has taken us time to get to the output that we have now. Actually writing it was fun, but it took us like 2.5 years to actually get it completed, get it done. We hired a professional editor even before we got it over to the publisher, who then edited it again, just because we were thinking of like, okay, we need somebody to check us. We'll geek out and we'll get wordy. I think what was the first version, Tom? Like 77,000 words or something. You're supposed to be like 45,000 words for a book or a business book or what have you. So it's a lot of passion, a lot of thought process that we've been working on with leaders, with teams for years, that we thought, hey, if we could put this together and share it with other teams and other organizations, how that would be impactful. So, a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of things that we put into it. But it all came from experience as well, trial and error. I would throw into that as well.
No, I would just say we were having conversations like this, but you weren't there, Paul. And eventually we said, there's a book in these conversations, so let's write it.
I had a great mentor. Her name is Janet Harvey. She's a master certified coach. When I was first getting into coaching, knew what I didn't know, I had to learn. And she's been a great influence on my life the last 12, 13 years. And she gave something to me early on. She said, everybody you work with is creative, capable, and resourceful. And that's always stuck with me. And when I'm working with a team or a leader, I would challenge you to be curious. Like next time you go to a team meeting or you show up with that team member, they're sitting across from you. They're creative, they're capable, they're resourceful in their own way. You don't need to dictate to them. You don't need to lead them to water. You can let them to be their authentic selves, fully engaged, like we were talking about before. But through that lens, and I'll say it again, that everybody you work with is creative, capable, and resourceful. And I think that's a mindset shift that really helps a lot of leaders to be curious and team members to show up differently.
And that's actually the first time I've heard that little ditty from Bryan, but it completely aligns with what I'm about to say, which is if you're a leader out there and you're feeling stuck, as long as you feel like the following things are true. One is, I know what direction I want to go, and I know I'm committed to persevering, given reasonable resistance. From there, do whatever you can to get your team to call out roadblocks as directly as possible and call out opportunities to move faster or move more skillfully as directly as possible and get that dialogue going. And that's how you're going to get that creativity out of your people and their ability to help you move the needle. Because if you're stuck in performance art and you're stuck in hitting this month's numbers and making it look good to management and pretending that you're in charge, and why would anyone ever question you're in charge? Well, then you're just not going to get the same buy-in. But if you're committed to the goal and you're committed to working on whatever comes up, then give people permission to be their full selves, share their full ideas. You got to expect the same baseline stuff from them too. They've got to be committed too. But if everybody's committed to that, then you can have a much more open and robust conversation, and problems are going to get solved faster. It's not going to look perfect, but it never does to begin with. So let's not pretend. Let's get progress, and then let's dial in the perfection in the right situations as we approach the goal.
Yeah, I think this was an awesome conversation, Paul. I think we mentioned this before we even synced up with you. We're two coaching geeks that are passionate about what we do, how we do it. We're learning all the time, so we're curious students as well. So, anybody out there, any of your listeners want to, have more conversations, want to geek out with us, want to ask us a question, they can go to our website, The Efficient Frontier of Teaming, find a lot of information there on us. They can send us an email. We're always willing to kind of jump on a call, even if it's 15, 20 minutes to answer some questions or, help a team through a consultation. So, we think, what would it look like if, teams had the opportunity in the workplace to actually have a roadmap to reach their full potential? And that puts a smile on both our faces. And when we approach it with teams that way as well, like We don't walk in and say, all right, this is broken, this needs to be fixed. They're already successful teams. Almost everybody has some sort of level of success. We start to get them thinking about what would that full potential look like? And we can't name it for them. They have to actually name it. And that's where, once again, the empowerment comes from, the ownership. They're just helping to get them there, challenge them in that positive way. And like I said, a lot of the things that we talked about today, and even more, we put those concepts in the book so that they're actual things that they can go back and use rather than just the theory behind it as well.